Have you ever felt that climate change is so huge that whenever you do feels pointless? Have you ever wondered why the mind keeps saying you are too small to matter, even though history is full of small actions that changed everything? Welcome back to the channel. Today we are walking into a message that sounds simple, but if you live it, it can change how you carry every problem in your life. The power of one, how each of us can make a difference, not as a motivational poster, not as a guilt trip, not as denial of big systems, as a practical spiritual path that turns helplessness into agency and turns agency into compassionate action. I want you to hold to main ideas through this whole story. First, the power of one is real because karma is real. Cause and effect, and every cause begins somewhere, often in one mind, one choice, one habit, repeated until it becomes culture. Second, the power of one becomes truly transformative only when it is guided by wisdom and compassion, because action without wisdom can create new harm, and action without compassion can burn out or turn cruel. Let us begin with the voice inside your head that shows up whenever the topic feels too big. It says, "What difference can I make?" It says, "Governments should fix this." It says, "Companies should fix this." It says, "I have school. I have stress. I have family issues. I have my own life." It says, "Even if I try, others will not." It says, "It is already too late." That voice can feel logical, but it is often a defense mechanism, because feeling powerless hurts. So the mind tries to protect itself by choosing the story that requires nothing. If nothing I do matters, then I do not have to feel responsibility. If nothing I do matters, then I do not have to face discomfort. If nothing I do matters, then I can numb out without guilt. But here is the strange paradox. That story does not remove pain. It multiplies pain because it adds helplessness to the crisis. Helplessness is one of the most toxic states the human mind can live in. It drains energy. It creates numbness. It encourages cynicism. It breaks the will. And when the will breaks, problems grow. So the message of the power of one is not naive optimism. It is medicine for helplessness. It says, you are not responsible for everything, but you are responsible for something. And something is enough to begin changing karma. Because karma is not built only by world leaders. Karma is built by millions of ordinary decisions that become demand, culture, policy, and infrastructure. Now imagine a teacher speaking calmly to people who feel overwhelmed. The teacher does not shout. The teacher does not shame. The teacher does not promise quick victory. The teacher says something like this in everyday language. If you drop one stone into a lake, the ripples are real. If you drop many stones, the lake changes. Your action is a stone. The ripples move outward. You may not see where they end, but they end somewhere. This is interdependence. It is one of the core spiritual truths that makes the power of one feel realistic rather than sentimental. Interdependence means nothing exists alone. Your food depends on soil, water, insects, farmers, and transport. Your clothes depend on labor, energy, and materials. Your phone depends on minerals, factories, shipping, and electricity. Your breath depends on forests and oceans. So when you act, you do not act in isolation. You act inside a web. And in a web, small changes can travel far. Now let us turn this into a story, because ideas stick when they have a face. There is a person named Eli. Eli is kind, but tired. Eli watches climate news sometimes and feels a heavy sadness. Eli also feels anger, but the anger has nowhere to land because the problem feels too big. Eli tries not to think about it. Eli focuses on daily life. But even when Eli avoids the topic, the worry stays in the background like a low hum. One day Eli hears a short talk about the power of one. The speaker tells a story about how people underestimate the impact of a single consistent person. Eli rolls the eyes at first. Eli has heard a lot of motivational talk, but then the speaker says something different. Do not try to do everything. Do not try to be perfect. Choose one area of life where you can reduce harm steadily. Then build community, because one becomes many through connection. That line lands because Eli does not need another guilt mountain. Eli needs a path, so Eli chooses one area. It is not the biggest area. It is the area that feels doable. Eli chooses attention. Why attention? Because Eli notices that most waste in life comes from mindlessness, buying without thinking, throwing away without noticing, driving without questioning, eating without gratitude, scrolling without limits, reacting without pause. Eli decides to practice one simple thing. Before doing anything automatic, pause for one breath, not a dramatic ritual. A tiny pause that says, I am awake. At first it feels silly, but then Eli notices something. The pause interrupts impulse. Impulse is a major driver of overconsumption. When impulse weakens, choices improve. So Eli starts living with a little more awareness. Eli brings a reusable bottle more often. Eli wastes less food. Eli buys fewer impulse items. Eli repairs something instead of replacing it. Eli walks short distances sometimes. Eli turns off lights more consistently. None of these actions saves the world in one day. But something changes inside Eli. Eli feels less helpless. And less helplessness is a huge shift because it changes the nervous system. Helpless nervous system collapses. A capable nervous system acts. Now the story deepens because Eli meets resistance. Friends tease. Why are you doing that? It does not matter. You are being dramatic. Just enjoy life. Stop worrying. This is a real test because the power of one is not only about making changes. It is about tolerating social pressure while staying kind. Eli does not preach. Eli does not shame. Eli simply stays consistent. Sometimes Eli explains calmly, I am not trying to be perfect. I am trying to be less harmful. That sentence is gentle and strong. Less harmful is a realistic goal, and it is also a spiritual goal. Because in Buddhist practice, non-harming is a central ethic, not to become morally superior, but to reduce suffering. So Eli keeps going. Weeks pass. Then something interesting happens. One friend starts asking questions, not because they were convinced by an argument, because they saw a lived example. Lived example is stronger than words. Another friend joins. Then another, not everyone, but some. And suddenly Eli is not only one, Eli becomes a small cluster. This is how one becomes many, not through forcing, through resonance. Now let us connect this to karma, because karma makes this story make sense. Karma is not only what happens to you. Karma is what you plant through intention and action. If you plant mindlessness, you harvest waste. If you plant awareness, you harvest restraint. If you plant compassion, you harvest cooperation. If you plant cynicism, you harvest numbness. So the power of one is really the power of planting causes. One person plants a cause. That cause influences another. That influence multiplies. Even if the multiplication is slow, it is real. Now let us widen the frame from personal habits to community, because climate change is not solved by private virtue alone. It also needs collective action. But private virtue can fuel collective action because it changes identity. When you live your values, you become more credible, more confident, and more connected. You are more willing to join others. You are less likely to collapse into hypocrisy shame. So, Eli joins a local group, not a huge group, a small group. They meet, they talk, they choose one project. It could be helping neighbors during heat waves. It could be planting shade trees. It could be supporting clean air initiatives. It could be reducing waste in a school. It could be educating gently. The project matters less than the practice. The practice is steady action without hatred. This is where a Buddhist perspective becomes extremely helpful, because activism can easily turn into anger addiction. Anger feels powerful, but it also burns you out. A Buddhist approach says, hold urgency, but do not poison your heart. If you poison your heart, you might win at a bait and lose your humanity. And losing humanity is not a victory. So Eli practices compassion while acting. Compassion for the vulnerable who suffer. Compassion for the confused who deny. Compassion for the exhausted who avoid. Compassion for the workers trapped in systems. Compassion for self. Because self-hatred does not help. This compassion does not mean no accountability. It means accountability without dehumanization. Now let us explore a deeper problem that makes people doubt the power of one. People confuse small scale with meaningless scale. They think, if my action is small, it is irrelevant. But in complex systems, small changes can be leverage points. A tiny hinge can move a heavy door. A small cultural shift can move policy. A small norm change can reshape markets. If enough people refuse certain products, companies change. If enough people demand transparency, supply chains change. If enough people vote, leadership changes. If enough people create local resilience, suffering reduces even when crises hit. So the power of one is not only about direct physical impact, it is also about cultural impact. Culture is a multiplier. Now, I want to tell a second story, because the power of one is not always visible as behavior. Sometimes it is visible as courage to speak. There is a person named Hannah. Hannah lives in a family where nobody talks about climate change seriously. If Hannah mentions it, adults dismiss it or change the subject. Hannah feels lonely. Hannah feels that the family is asleep. Hannah watches a talk about the power of one and realizes that one kind of impact is conversational impact. Hannah decides to speak differently, not by accusing, not by calling people bad, by asking one question at dinner. If heat waves get worse, what should we do to protect grandparents? That question is practical, not ideological. It invites scare rather than argument. The family responds. Someone says, we should get fans. Someone says, we should check on neighbors. Someone says, we should store water. The conversation becomes real. Then Hannah asks another question later. Do we know where our electricity comes from? Again, not accusation. Curiosity. Slowly the family becomes less avoidant, not because Hannah won a debate, because Hannah made the topic human. This is another power of one, the power to open a door in conversation. Conversation can lead to planning. Planning can reduce suffering. Reducing suffering is the purpose of compassion. Now let us talk about why a Buddhist teacher like Ringu Tulku might emphasize the power of one in a climate context. Because Buddhism often deals with a mind trap that looks like this: if I cannot do everything, I will do nothing. This is perfectionism. Perfectionism is often disguised as logic, but it is actually fear. Fear of failing, fear of not being enough, fear of being judged. So the mind chooses nothing, because nothing avoids the risk of being imperfect. But nothing is also a choice, and nothing has karma. Nothing plants causes for more suffering. So Buddhist practice encourages the middle way. Do what you can, do it steadily, do it with a clean heart, do it without attachment to immediate results. This last part matters, because climate action is long. If you act only when results are immediate, you will quit. If you act with non-attachment, you can endure. Non-attachment here does not mean not caring. It means caring without needing guarantees. It means doing what is right because it is right, not because it is sure to win quickly. That is mature hope. Now let us connect the power of one to compassion in a deeper way. Many people think compassion is a feeling, but in Buddhist practice, compassion is also courage. Compassion is the courage to feel. Compassion is the courage to stay present with suffering. Compassion is the courage to act, even when it is inconvenient. Compassion is the courage to include people you disagree with. So the power of one is also the power of one compassionate person. In a room full of numbness, one compassionate person can change the tone. Tone shapes behavior. Behavior shapes outcomes. So, do not underestimate tone. If you speak calmly, others calm down. If you speak with respect, others listen more. If you speak with hatred, others harden. Hardening blocks cooperation. Cooperation is needed for climate solutions. So your inner state is not private. It is part of the climate response. This is a huge spiritual insight. Your mind is part of the ecosystem. Now let us talk about the environment as a mirror of the mind, because this is where the teaching becomes even more personal. Environmental crisis is driven by collective craving. Craving for more comfort, craving for more speed, craving for more status, craving for more consumption. And craving is not satisfied by getting what it wants. Craving is satisfied by learning contentment. So the deepest climate solution is not only policy, it is the training of contentment. When enough people learn to want less without feeling deprived, demand changes. When demand changes, systems shift. This is why the power of one matters. Because one person can start training contentment, then one person can influence friends, then one person can influence family, then one person can influence community, then community influences culture, culture influences policy, policy influences infrastructure, infrastructure influences millions of lives. This is how one becomes many. Now I want to address a cynical objection, because some of you might be thinking it. You might think, okay, but big corporations pollute more. Why should individuals do anything? This is a fair question, but it has a hidden trap. The trap is that it tries to turn responsibility into a zero-sum game, as if only one level matters. In reality, multiple levels matter. Policy matters, corporate accountability matters, system change matters, and individual behavior matters because it shapes culture, demand, and political will. Also, individual practice matters because it shapes the kind of person who can show up for system change without burning out. If your mind is chaotic, your activism becomes chaotic. If your mind is steady, your activism becomes steady. So individual practice is not a distraction from systems. It is fuel for systems. Now let us return to Eli, because Eli experiences something that makes the teaching complete. After months of practice, Eli faces a wave of despair again. A news story, a disaster, a discouraging political moment. Eli feels the old thought return. It is too late. Eli notices the thought. Eli breathes. Eli remembers a Buddhist teaching that is simple. You cannot control the entire world. You can control your next intention. So Eli asks, what is the next wise step? Eli does not try to solve everything. Eli does one thing. Eli checks on a neighbor. Eli attends a community meeting. Eli donates to a practical cause if possible. Eli reduces waste again. Eli keeps practicing. And something shifts again. The despair loses its grip. Because despair is strongest when you stop moving. Movement does not mean frantic activity. It means meaningful action. Meaningful action is hope in motion. Now let us talk about the real meaning of the word power here. Power is often misunderstood as control over others, but spiritual power is control over your own mind. If you can control your impulses, you have power. If you can restrain greed, you have power. If you can soften hatred, you have power. If you can stay compassionate under stress, you have power. If you can keep acting without burning out, you have power. So the power of one is first the power to train your own mind. Then it becomes the power to influence the web you live in. Now we close by bringing everything into a single lived message. You are not responsible for fixing the entire climate crisis alone, but you are responsible for what you add to the crisis and what you add to the healing. One person can add panic and division. One person can add common cooperation. One person can spread denial. One person can spread truth with compassion. One person can consume mindlessly. One person can live with awareness. One person can choose cruelty. One person can choose kindness. One person can quit. One person can keep going. These choices are not small. They are seeds. And seeds create forests. So if you feel overwhelmed, do not demand that you become a hero overnight. Become consistent. Choose one area. Practice one breath pauses. Plant one better cause each day. Join with others when you can. Speak truth without hatred. Serve where you are. And remember that karma is built in ordinary moments. If you keep planting better causes, your destiny changes. If enough people plant better causes, the world changes. Thank you for spending this time with me today. Share in the comments what one small change you believe you can sustain for the next month without burning out. And share what helps you stay hopeful without denying reality. Please subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave a comment to support this community. And I will see you in the next one.